They believed themselves untouchable. For centuries, the Valnor Dominion had stretched its fleets across the spiral arms, extinguishing resistance wherever it arose, and fleeing only when opposition proved too fierce. To them, retreat was not dishonor but strategy. They were a species born of calculation, bred in vast crystal cities orbiting suns tamed by their machines, a civilization that saw the galaxy as a board in themselves, as players far above the pieces scattered upon it. When humanity was first encountered, they applied the same logic. Primitive bipeds, death-world survivors crawling out from a single planet, whose history was marked by endless conflict against themselves, against their environment, against extinction. The Dominion saw them, measured them, and found them beneath concern. A brief skirmish was enough to prove otherwise. Humanity did not yield. They did not calculate survival by balanced sheets of resources and acceptable loss. They fought until the ground was nothing but ash beneath them, until skies burned with the wreckage of ships, and then they fought again. The Valnor attempted their usual maneuver: withdrawal, evacuation, abandoning the contested systems as though pulling back a hand from a flame. They assumed, as always, that their enemy would remain rooted to its territory, grateful for survival, licking wounds, clinging to safety. They were wrong. Humans chased. The first step of pursuit was not impulsive. It was a decision carved into stone at the heart of a council, where nations once divided by oceans and ideologies now spoke with one voice. Their declaration was not of conquest but of inevitability. To let the Valnor retreat unpunished was to guarantee that one day they would return, stronger, more arrogant, more prepared. The only choice was to follow, to hunt them across the abyss, to ensure that the lesson burned into the Dominion was one they could never forget. It was an old truth rediscovered. Humanity had always been a species of pursuit hunters. On the plains of their birthworld, they had run prey into exhaustion. Not the fastest, not the strongest, but the most enduring. They were persistence made flesh, lungs and muscles crafted by evolution not to sprint, but to continue when others collapsed. That instinct had never left. It lived in their myths, in their wars, in their endless striving beyond their own planet, beyond their own star. And now it found its ultimate expression. The Valnor could not understand it. They abandoned outposts, scuttled stations, erased databanks, scattering like shadows before a coming fire. Humanity arrived days or weeks later, finding wreckage and emptiness, and simply pressed on. Every destroyed bridge became a challenge. Every empty system was fuel for resolve. What the Dominion saw as delay, humanity saw as direction. The trail was marked in ruins, and ruins were enough. The first systems fell quiet behind the retreat. Valnor fleets pulled back, expecting pursuit to falter with distance. Instead, it only deepened. Human ships adapted. Supply chains grew longer, stretched to breaking, but the species that had once crossed oceans in fragile wooden hulls now crossed starfields with the same certainty. Sacrifice was not weakness to them. Sacrifice was proof of will. Crews left behind to establish refueling stations, engineers working with the bones of alien technology, soldiers accepting that they might never return to Earth. All became part of the great pursuit. The Dominion called it madness. Humanity called it survival. In the chambers of the Valnor High Conclave, debates turned into accusations, accusations into fear. Reports arrived not of battle, but of relentless shadows advancing behind them, of colonies stripped bare before departure, of humans salvaging what was abandoned and turning it against its makers. A single phrase began circulating in their encrypted communications: the chasers. The word carried weight, eroding confidence, reshaping strategy. For what weapon could be used against an enemy that did not stop when you fled, but accelerated? The Valnor tried deception. False trails were laid, star charts altered, beacons transmitting phantom coordinates. Humanity followed them, discovered the ruse, and returned to the true trail with greater fury. They tried scorched earth retreats, detonating planets' worth of resources into nothingness. Humanity learned to make do with less, to carve sustenance from the void, to endure hunger and deprivation as they always had. They tried ambushes, leaving behind fleets in silent systems, weapons charged in the darkness. The humans charged into those traps, bloodied but unbroken, and when the Dominion disengaged, their pursuers still advanced. For the first time in living memory, the Valnor Dominion felt fear. Not fear of defeat, they had known stalemate and loss before. Fear of inevitability. Fear of something older than their civilization, something written not in logic but in the marrow of hunters. The human fleet did not roar or boast. They sent no grand declarations, no ultimatums. Their silence was worse. Each move was methodical, deliberate, patient. They were not rushing toward victory. They were closing distance, step by step, without distraction, without mercy. Valnor citizens began whispering in their markets, in their quiet stations where news trickled slower than light. They asked why the humans followed, why they had not stopped, what crime was so great that it demanded pursuit across the stars. But those who studied human history already knew the answer. Humanity had never tolerated the predator that struck and fled. The wolf that prowled at the edge of firelight was hunted until it was gone. The raider that struck villages was pursued until its sails no longer touched the sea. To attack humanity was not to fight a battle. It was to ignite a hunt. The Dominion believed distance was safety. But to a species born of endless horizons, distance was an invitation. They had crossed deserts for water, mountains for land, oceans for discovery, and now, light years for justice. Their enemies had fled into the dark, and the dark itself became the path. At the close of the first year, the Valnor attempted their boldest retreat yet. A great migration of fleets, entire sectors emptied, billions relocated, all resources bent to the task of vanishing deeper into the galaxy's spiral arms. It was a maneuver designed to overwhelm pursuers with scale, to erase tracks by sheer magnitude of exodus. They left behind nothing but stripped worlds and silent stars. But humanity was not deterred. The pursuit did not waver. Explorers charted the abandoned routes, analysts pieced together fragments of transmissions, and soldiers pressed ever forward. The Dominion's vast migration became the very beacon of their trail. The harder they ran, the clearer they marked themselves. Some Valnor began to question the wisdom of flight. Would it not be better to turn and fight to crush the predators outright? But their commanders knew better. They had fought the humans already. They had seen the tenacity that turned battlefields into quagmires of attrition, where no surrender was offered, no retreat considered. To fight humans was to drown in their persistence. And so they ran, believing still that somewhere, some distance, would break the chase. They had yet to learn the truth. The chase did not fade with time. If anything, it grew sharper, more refined, as though humanity had been waiting for this exact test since the first time one of their kind looked out across an open horizon and saw prey vanish into the distance. Weeks turned into months, months into years, and still the pursuit pressed forward. Supply lines stretched like thread across the void, taut and fragile, yet never breaking. Where once the Valnor thought distance would shield them, they now saw distance only forge the hunters stronger. For humanity, the pursuit became its own culture, a unifying rhythm that erased divisions of nation and creed. Soldiers became settlers, engineers became pioneers, and every fleet carried with it not just weapons but the seed of continuity. They were not chasing as raiders. They were advancing as a civilization carried forward on the current of vengeance and necessity. The Dominion fled, but in their fleeing they drew maps humanity had never possessed. What had been unexplored regions became marked with scars of withdrawal, each burned system an unintentional gift of navigation. The Valnor called this madness, and in their desperation they began to fracture. Fleets grew weary. Colonies grumbled under the strain of uprooting again and again. The leadership demanded obedience, but whispers spread even among their loyal ranks. Why run from creatures of a single planet? Why spend resources fleeing predators who should not have been able to rise beyond their cradle? Yet fear was contagious, and the fear was real. Everywhere, reports spoke of humanity still advancing, of burned ambushes, of broken traps. Even when victories occurred, when a human fleet was battered or broken, the survivors rebuilt, reorganized, and surged forward as though pain itself were only fuel. For the Valnor, losses drained them. For the humans, losses ignited them. The second year saw the first great collapse. A frontier colony, ordered to evacuate before the human tide, refused. Their leaders declared that running had only invited the nightmare closer, that the only way to end pursuit was to stand and fight. The result was swift and merciless. Humanity reached them, and though no words of conquest were spoken, the outcome was written in ruin. The colony was destroyed, its fleet scattered, its signals silenced. When news of the obliteration reached the Dominion's core, it was not merely military failure but cultural devastation. For the first time, ordinary Valnor citizens understood what it meant to be prey. Humanity did not celebrate these victories with grand proclamations. They did not pause to boast or to demand surrender. They simply continued. That silence weighed heavier than any declaration. The Valnor could not negotiate with hunters who never spoke. They could not manipulate predators who offered no opening. To the Dominion, diplomacy had always been a weapon, a way to buy time or advantage. But the humans were not buying. They were taking. As the pursuit pressed deeper into the galaxy's arms, alien empires beyond the Dominion began to notice. The Yalvek Confederacy sent envoys, hoping to understand the tide before it reached them. The Sovereign hierarchy debated alliances, fearing the spread of war. Yet no intervention came. None wished to entangle themselves with either side. The humans were too unknown, their motives unreadable, their tenacity unsettling. The Dominion was too arrogant, too despised to inspire loyalty. And so the chase became a spectacle watched from afar, a legend unfolding in real time. Legends have power. Stories spread faster than fleets, slipping across trade routes and hidden channels. Soon, in markets and outposts untouched by either Dominion or Earth, the tale was whispered. Of a predator species who never stopped, who crossed starfields as easily as planes, who hunted not for food but for retribution. Parents frightened their children into obedience by warning them of the chasers of the stars. Even those who doubted found unease settling in their bones when they saw the migration routes of the Dominion, stretching endlessly before the relentless shadow behind them. The Dominion attempted resistance again. They marshaled a fleet of unprecedented scale, not to ambush, but to meet the humans directly, to grind them down through attrition. In that clash, whole constellations burned. The Valnor fought with desperation, throwing weapons meant for planetary defense into the void, deploying technologies long forbidden by treaties. Humanity suffered grievous losses. Ships shattered, crews torn apart by the violence of exotic weapons, fleets reduced to half their number. And still, when the smoke cleared, the humans pressed forward. The Valnor fled once more, their mighty armada broken on the will of those who refused to die in retreat. In that aftermath, the psychology of the Dominion shifted irreversibly. The pursuit was no longer seen as temporary. It was eternal. The chasers would not stop, not when fleets burned, not when distance grew, not when hope itself seemed extinguished. To the Valnor, every sunrise on every world brought only one question: how much closer had the humans come? Entire worlds began to fall into despair. Some citizens abandoned evacuation fleets, choosing instead to scatter into the void on their own, hoping anonymity might save them. Others embraced fatalism, insisting that resistance was pointless, that to flee was to prolong the inevitable. But there were still those who clung to arrogance, convinced that somewhere, somehow, they could run far enough to be safe. The Dominion's leaders seized on that arrogance. They promised salvation at the edge of known space, beyond the spiral arms, into regions uncharted even by their long reach. They claimed that if they only pressed far enough, the humans would exhaust themselves. The promise rang hollow, but for a people built on centuries of supremacy, admitting the opposite was unthinkable. And so the migration continued, a tide of ships carrying millions, billions, ever deeper into the dark. The humans followed. Distance that would have shattered lesser species was endured. Hardships that should have ended civilizations became fuel. Crews learned to live on rationed air, on recycled water, on systems patched beyond reason. Generations of endurance found their echo in every ship, in every soldier, in every engineer who refused to surrender to distance. And as they advanced, humanity adapted. What had begun as pursuit became expansion. Forward bases hardened into colonies, colonies into fortresses, fortresses into new frontiers. Where the Valnor fled, humanity rooted, ensuring that even if the pursuit lasted centuries, the chain would never break. By the third year, the Dominion's cultural identity was in tatters. Once proud worlds now whispered of their rulers as cowards. Some called for peace, but peace was impossible. The humans had not come to negotiate. They had come to end the threat forever. And though the Valnor still dreamed of distance as shield, more and more began to see the truth. Distance only prolonged the agony. The fear became ritual. Children were taught not to linger in play, lest the humans catch them. Traders muttered charms against shadows, convinced that invoking the chasers would draw them nearer. Priests preached that the pursuit was divine punishment, that their arrogance had awakened judgment in flesh. Fear became culture, and culture became paralysis. But paralysis could not hold forever. Some among the Dominion's military, seeing the futility of flight, argued for surrender. Quiet communications were sent, intercepted, deciphered by humanity, only to be met with silence. That silence broke them more than rejection. It was not that surrender was refused. It was that surrender was irrelevant. The hunters had no interest in negotiation. The praise plea was meaningless. Thus, the Dominion fractured further. Civil wars erupted on distant colonies, not against humanity, but against their own leaders who demanded endless retreat. Ships broke away from convoys, abandoning the migration to take their chances alone. The Valnor Dominion, once united in arrogance, now crumbled in fear, torn apart not by enemy fire but by the inevitability of pursuit. And still, humanity followed. At the rim of the galaxy, where stars thinned into the abyss and the spiral arms faded into darkness, the Valnor Dominion finally began to understand there was no further horizon to flee toward. The great migration that had carried billions across light years was exhausted. Fleets were scattered, convoys stretched thin, colonies barely functioning. They had crossed the breadth of known space, burned through resources beyond measure, and abandoned worlds older than their history. Yet still the humans came. The pursuit had become more than a war. It was a presence, a shadow that lived in every calculation, every decision. Entire councils debated strategies, but none dared suggest the one solution no one could bear to admit, that perhaps they should turn and kneel. Pride remained, hollow but unyielding, and so even at the galaxy's edge they clung to illusions of escape. But illusions do not stop predators. Humanity advanced with the same implacable rhythm it had shown since the first retreat. Every fleet battered was rebuilt. Every obstacle turned into an advantage. Systems that had been nothing but desolate husks became footholds. Stars dim and abandoned now burned with human stations. Where the Valnor saw emptiness, the humans saw a path. The Dominion tried once more to consolidate. They gathered their remaining fleets, recalling stragglers, reinforcing with weapons once kept as legends, deploying ships of terrifying scale and power. They promised their people that this would be the last stand, that the chasers could not follow forever, that at the edge of the galaxy they would finally shatter against the wall of Dominion might. Fear was turned into defiance, desperation into false hope. Billions clung to the lie because the truth was unbearable. When humanity arrived, there was no parley, no delay, no hesitation. The last stand ignited in fire across the rim, stars lit by weapons never meant to be unleashed in such numbers. The Dominion fought like an animal cornered, teeth bared, claws raking, every instinct screaming for survival. For a moment it seemed they might even hold. Human fleets burned, ships torn apart, lives extinguished in silence. But the pattern repeated as it always had. Humanity did not break. Humanity endured. Losses were fuel. Sacrifice was momentum. Every ship that fell became the reason another pressed forward. The battle dragged across systems, not in days or weeks but in months of endless struggle, yet the outcome was inevitable from the first shot. Because the Dominion fought for survival, while humanity fought for conclusion. The Valnor sought to escape death. The humans sought to deliver it. When the fleets finally broke, it was not in fire but in collapse. Crews deserted, admirals surrendered, entire ships powered down mid-battle, unable to continue against an enemy that refused to yield. The Dominion's proud banners, carried across galaxies, became tattered remnants drifting in the void. And still the humans advanced, not pausing to gloat, not slowing to savor victory, but pressing forward until resistance was dust. The psychological collapse was worse than the military one. For centuries the Valnor had believed themselves the arbiters of power, the lords of distance, the masters of flight. Now they saw themselves as prey written into myth, a lesson carved into the stars. Their children grew up with nightmares of human shadows. Their elders whispered curses on the arrogance that had provoked the hunt. Entire cultures reshaped themselves around the single truth that could no longer be denied. To flee from Earth's children was to invite extinction. Yet the final blow was not extermination. Humanity, at the height of its fury, did not annihilate the Dominion utterly. They dismantled it. Worlds were stripped of fleets, governments toppled, industries broken, leaders dragged down. The Dominion was left not as an empire but as scattered shards, incapable of rising again. This was the predator's law. The chase did not end with the destruction of prey, but with its submission, its spirit broken beyond repair. And in that silence, when the last Dominion ship surrendered, the galaxy listened. Other civilizations who had watched from afar now understood the lesson. Humanity was not the strongest, nor the oldest, nor the most advanced. But they were the most dangerous because they never stopped. Distance meant nothing. Obstacles meant nothing. Loss meant nothing. Once they set themselves upon a path, they walked it to the end, no matter how far. Legends began to crystallize. Stories told of the great chase across the stars, of the Dominion that had fled and the predators that had followed without pause. In markets and temples, the phrase took root, the chasers of the stars. To children of alien species, it became a warning. To rulers of alien empires, it became a caution. To humanity itself, it became an identity. For humans, it was not conquest they carried from the hunt. It was the reaffirmation of what they had always been. Endurance hunters, relentless pursuers, survivors who did not accept the escape of those who threatened them. From the savannas of their first world to the rim of the galaxy, the truth was unchanged. Prey could run. Humanity would follow. The Dominion was no more, but the chase was not forgotten. The lesson spread wider than their empire had ever reached. Civilizations whispered of the day humanity might turn its gaze upon them, of the danger of provoking a species that did not believe in retreat. Fear became respect, and respect became a new balance of power. The humans did not declare dominion over the galaxy. They did not carve their name in banners across every world. They returned instead to the steady work of building, of living, of ensuring the threat would never rise again. But in the silence of alien minds, the shadow remained. The chasers were out there, and they would always be out there. At the edge of the galaxy, where the last Dominion fleets had fallen, the stars were quiet. The chase was over, but in the marrow of every human the instinct remained, unbroken, eternal. If prey fled, humanity would follow. If enemies struck and ran, they would be hunted. The galaxy had learned a truth older than empires and deeper than technology. Distance is no escape from Earth.